out of every 100 graduates coming out of our colleges, Nilanjan, in the year of graduation, barely 4 of them get a job. And the other 96, nobody has any use for, because the education system is saying what you've learned in university is close to useless. The nation state as it has existed for 160 years is crumbling in front of us. It's crumbling in Europe, it's crumbling in South America, it's crumbling in Africa, it's crumbling in Asia. And what we as investors are trying to think through is what follows after the nation state. When we face our politicians, we should know they're pretending when they make promises, just as they know they are pretending when they make promises. As I'm saying, there's no practical way for them to do much in the world that we are living in and the world that they are heading towards. And this is true the world over.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching Conversations with Nilanjan. The state of the economy, the less said the better. Whichever direction we look at, there is a maze of worries. Any indicator that we pick up, gold, silver, employment, the state of the rupee, the direction that it is going in, the graph that it is showing is extremely worrying. So we will be talking about all of this combined and as to how this is affecting people and of course how it is defining or rather taking forward the state of the Indian economy. Joining me on the show is Saurabh Mukherjea, a very well-known name in the financial sector, who is the Chief Investment Officer and a founder of the Marcellus Investment Managers. Welcome to this program, Saurabh Mukherjea. You have been on the show about 15 months ago when we discussed the crisis that the Indian middle class was facing. That crisis still remains. We will be talking beyond that. One of the reasons as to why we are talking to you at this moment is because you have co-authored a recent kind of a bestseller already, Breakpoint. Let me start with...
Thank you for inviting me back. It's a pleasure to be back on your show.
Lovely to speak to you and drill some sense of the state of the Indian economy and the crisis which the people are facing. Let's begin with the title, Breakpoint. Now, we often say in India that the only religion that unites India is cricket. We are a sports crazy nation. But you have picked a word from the world of tennis, breakpoint. Let's try to understand from you what is that breakpoint and what may not be eventually be able to save the breakpoint.
Sure. So Nilanjan, I'm a geeky economist first and foremost. Whatever my credentials in sports might be, we'll come to that in a bit. But I'm a geeky economist, and that's my sort of initial training in my university years. And in economics, a breakpoint is where a trend breaks, right? In a data series, where a trend breaks and a new trend begins, right? So the first reason we called the book Breakpoint, the crisis of the middle class and the future of work, was there's a whole bunch of things in India which seem to have broken down somewhere around 2018, 19, 20, 21. Those 4 years, 18, 19, 20, 21, there you'll see in the book chart after chart after chart showing there's a whole bunch of trends in India which broke down. So for example, till 2020, white collar jobs in India were doubling every 6 years, right? So around 12% CAGR, right? Number of white collar jobs were doubling every 6 years. It was a tremendous achievement. It was a miracle. For decades from 91 through to 2020, every 6 years, India was doubling white collar jobs. It was a tremendous achievement for a large but poor economy. In the last 4 years, white collar job growth has almost disappeared, right? So clear breakpoint in employment, right? There are many such data series which break down around that 2020 period. Household debt explodes, household wages come under serious pressure. So that was the first reason for calling calling the book Breakpoint as an allusion, as a reference to the fact that multiple data series which pertain to the well-being of the middle class break down around the beginning of COVID, right? The second was I wanted to use the term in a subversive sense as well, right? In tennis, Breakpoint refers to the fact that the guy who's at the receiving end, the guy who's
Right.
at the receiving end, not the fellow serving, the other person, right, the receiver of the serve, he or she might have the upper hand, right?
Opportunity, has an
Yeah, might have an
opportunity to get
opportunity.
one up.
That's right. And what we are saying in the last one third of the book is this crisis which is upon India, this hammering of the middle class, the pulverization of our IT sector, right? The decimation of white collar jobs. This has a silver lining. And the silver lining is this will be the remaking of India. This is potentially the beginning of the long awaited manufacturing recovery, because what's happening is AI is decimating our IT sector, it's decimating middle class jobs, automation is decimating middle class jobs. In so doing, it'll make the currency much cheaper. Our country has suffered from an overvalued currency for decades because our 350 billion dollars of IT exports make our currency expensive. It renders the manufacturing sector uncompetitive, because if your currency is overvalued, your manufacturing sector simply cannot compete with the Bangladeshis and the Vietnams of the world. But that era, I think, is behind us, with the IT sector now facing almost a daily decimation. Our main source of foreign exchange is dwindling in front of our eyes. That in turn will render the currency far more cheaper, far more competitive. Combined with the free trade agreements, I am pretty confident this will be the beginning of Indian manufacturing's renaissance. So that the 30-year period or 35-year period from 1991 to 2026, the economic model that characterized India in these 35 years, which was we will send bright young people to university, they'll come out, we'll pay them a few lakhs of wages and then sell their brains, sell their intellectual property to the Western companies, and thus earn $350 billion, which will be used to finance this mic, this laptop, my phone, and that's how the country was running. We basically
Right.
earn foreign exchange by selling the services of young Indians, and those foreign exchange would basically drive consumption in our country. That
Right.
that model is breaking in front of us, and ironically, it gives India the chance to build what is a more conventional emerging market model built around manufacturing services, sports goods, footwear, engineered components, auto ancillaries, small cars, motorbikes, medicines, pharmaceuticals, the standard stuff which Southeast Asia has been selling for the last 30 years and has used that as a ladder to build prosperity. We are beginning that journey now, and that was the other sense in which I wanted the book to be called Breakpoint. That it looks as if we are at the receiving end, right? And we are
Yes.
at the receiving
Whereas
end.
you're arguing that we are not. We are
Right?
actually at the
Or
point
in
of a
this,
new beginning.
yeah, in this hammering lies a new beginning. In the hammering that we are facing on a daily, weekly basis lies a new beginning, and that beginning bodes well for a section of Indian society which arguably is less advantaged, less educated than us, but who deserve a good life as much as anybody watching this podcast does.
Uh, for a new beginning, there has to be policies, there has to be a lot of support from the government. What you have seen over the past 12 years, because we are, in the middle of a government which has been there already in power for 12 years. What signs do you read that would they be able to provide the right kind of support that this phase would require?
So I grew up in Delhi in the 80s. Given that I come from a middle class Bengali household,
Yes,
I belong to my parents were standard middle class public sector workers.
right.
And the point of view was very much what you took, that the government should deliver, the government should do this, and the government should do
Hmm.
that. Um, and then the government didn't do much for my parents. We ended up migrating to the UK. I grew up there, went to the LSE, studied economics. And over the last 20 years, I've realized that whether it's in the UK or in India, whether it's in Europe or in India, there actually isn't very much the government can now do in a free market economy, right? So, for
Okay.
example, if tomorrow Microsoft decided that they'll yank Microsoft Office away from India, right? There is no force on this planet which can stop them. And if Microsoft yanks Microsoft Office, right, then my business, the National Stock Exchange, the payment system in India, our banking system, our airline network, all of that will come to a standstill. There's nothing that the government of Sweden or the government of UK or the government of India can do, right? So the era where the government could make a big difference is by and large gone. Right? There was once upon a time, especially in the early decades after the Second World War, where both in the Western context and in the Indian context, the government could do a reasonable amount. But in the current global context in which we live, where it's impossible, almost impossible now for governments to tax companies and globally mobile capital and globally mobile individuals properly, where tax regimes the world over are crumbling in front of us. I think the power of the state is by and large gone. Where I think where I think India will emerge out of all this is the brutality of the free market now stares us in the face. So let's just think through what will happen, I think, in India. As the IT services piece breaks down in front of us, as millions of people in Hyderabad, Bangalore, Gurgaon, Pune, Bombay, etc., lose their jobs in the face of this in the face of this mounting technological disruption, I think three sets of free market forces will assert themselves. The first is that the currency will get much cheaper, right? By definition, the balance of payments has to balance in some way, right? And if our foreign exchange outgo on the mic that I'm using for this podcast and the phone that I use and my lovely laptop that I'm using for the podcast, if India's foreign exchange earnings are not enough to pay for these imported items, then the currency will depreciate till it finds a
Further,
level at which our manufactured exports become competitive, right? So that's the first basic mathematical almost identity. The balance of payments has to balance. The RBI's modest $400 billion of non-gold foreign exchange reserves can't last very long. Right? They will probably buy us 6-8 months of breathing space. But if you take a 3-4 year view, it's almost inevitable that the currency will have to get hammered for our manufactured exports to find competitiveness.
right.
The quicker we negotiate attractive free trade agreements with Europe, with UK, with the US, the better. I think the European FTA is actually pretty good, and kudos to the Commerce Ministry for pulling that off. Hopefully, we'll have an equally compelling FTA with America. And the more compelling the FTAs are, Nilanjan, the less the currency will have to give. But by and large, the currency will have to give meaningfully for our manufactured exports to be able to earn us the foreign exchange that we need to buy the imports that sustain our day-to-day life. The second piece is real estate. Right, real estate in our cities, real estate in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Pune has been sustained by middle-class jobs, reasonably well-paid middle-class jobs in banks, in media, in IT services,
To
right?
be able
But
to buy multi-crore
that's
apartments in these
right,
cities.
right. And legendarily in Delhi, Bombay, 150 crore, 200 crore flats, right? So that story is going to fade. That money simply, though, and in fact, we can already see Gurgaon real estate, Hyderabad real estate, residential real estate markets in suburban Bangalore, Hyderabad, Gurgaon are already freezing because there simply aren't jobs available for people to be able to take mortgages of 3, 4, 5, 6 crores because if you don't have a salary, if you don't have a job, you're not going to go and kill yourself buying a $500,000 car flat, right? So the second likely market to correct is residential real estate, and more generally, Nilanjan, industrial land in our country is say twice as expensive as it is in Vietnam or in parts of China.
Right.
Industrial land in many parts of India is actually the same price as it is in Europe. Industrial land in India is way more expensive than it is in America. Way, orders of magnitude, right? More expensive than it is in America. Obviously, you can't compete in the global economy if your industrial land itself is 2x, 3x that of a Vietnam or a United States of America, right? So that's the second market, I think, where real estate and land, I think there's bound to be a
There's going to
pronounced
be a
correction
correction.
because the jobs which the middle class jobs that propped up your residential real estate market are dwindling away in front of us on a weekly basis. And the third piece is government spending, right? As I was discussing, we can see the world over, including in India, tax bases are under brutal competitive pressure. As soon as the government of India says, I will tax you, family, wealthy Indians say, "Well, thank you so much for telling me you'll tax me. I will decamp. I will decamp to some global financial center where tax rates are close to zero." And by the way, this is true the world over. If Britain tries to tax talented bankers or traders, they simply move to Switzerland or some offshore financial center
where
and
they have
carry
to
on,
pay less tax.
where they have to pay less tax. And the same applies to companies. If America says, "I will tax Apple," Apple says, "I will move to Ireland and I will headquarter myself in Ireland, and the Irish government will give me a sweet deal on taxes," right? So the world over, tax bases are under enormous pressure. And it's only going to get worse with each passing year, because increasingly what will happen is talented global professionals will be paid in cryptocurrency, and there's no tax regime in the world which will be able to detect that they're being paid in cryptocurrency. And companies, large MNCs, will find cleverer and cleverer ways of avoiding tax. And therefore, as tax regimes shrink, the government will have to pull back. So government spending in our
The government
country,
will not be able to spend money.
the government will not be able to spend money, and therefore the whole construct where government will be providing railways, it will be providing university education, it will be providing healthcare, all of that, I think, gradually will
Let me ask you the biggest question, here.
Hmm.
In the last few years, especially after 2020, with the advent of COVID, we have seen an exponential expansion of what the government presents as welfare, uh, giving free this, free that, free this, everything is free. Because of its failure to be able to ensure that people can earn enough money to be able to live, to remain alive, food, for instance, is today what the food which is distributed by the government, free aid. It's not welfare; it is actually charity. Because otherwise, people will simply die. We will possibly be having similar kind of situations which we saw in the 1940s in Bengal, during the famine. So, what would happen to those things? Because if you say that the government will not, there will not be a huge number of jobs, the nature of the market is going to change, the disparity level will grow further. That is what is the fear of most people. We have already seen that in the last 20 years, the kind of disparity which is increased in the country. So, how will
Right.
all this play out?
Right. So just to sort of address this point, right? I'll give you the data, and then we can have a debate about whether
Yes,
indeed
yes.
people will die if the government pulls back, right? So from what I can see, looking at the union government spending, and I then added up the state government spending, and then remember the PSUs, the state PSUs and the central PSUs spending is not inside that, but I think that also should be counted as government spending. So uh, um, states plus center plus the PSUs will be borrowing well in excess of 30 trillion rupees in the current fiscal, the year to March 27, right? So the states, the center alone, as per the union budget, the center alone will be borrowing some 16, 17 trillion. The states will borrow at least as much. And then if you add the PSUs,
And the
state university,
PSUs.
right? So something like the DTC in Delhi, that itself will borrow colossal sums of money, right? Similarly, most state transport corporations will be borrowing colossal sums of money. Most discoms will be borrowing colossal sums of money. So the bond market in Mumbai, the bond market, the state development loan market, our banking system, right, that will have to funnel out. So some miracle it'll have to find 30, 40 trillion rupees. Right now, just to give you a sense of how much money that is, the Indian banking system lends around 20 trillion rupees a year. Right. So it is inconceivable that we can continue like this, where different apparatus of the state is borrowing colossal sums of money. They're being used in various ways, as you mentioned. Um, uh, Now, whether people will die if this stops or not I think, is a subject of debate, right? Different people will different happen, but I can tell you that this is utterly unsustainable. This is not going to work. Remember, what's happening is, so far, because the bond market simply cannot finance this, right? Remember, the government is borrowing by issuing bonds or SDL, state development loans.
Right.
Because this simply isn't enough money in the country to finance this, the RBI basically is printing money.
Or finance all the welfare schemes that we are talking about,
Yeah, so
right?
the government is spending on
Okay.
welfare. It doesn't have the money. Tax revenues are under the pump, right? So the
Mm.
government is then borrowing money in the bond market in Mumbai. The central government is using bonds. The state governments are using SDLs. But our country simply doesn't have 30, 40 trillion a year to fork out for this because the banking system alone, the
So
banking
so
system
these
itself.
schemes so these schemes would not be continued, and these are the schemes which get you the votes.
Right. So the whole construct of democracy will have to be rethought because it's simply you cannot carry on like this. So just to quickly finish off on the economics of this.
Yeah.
So what's happened in
Yes.
India over the recent years is the RBI is printing money, and
Mm.
that RBI is then buying the bonds in the by, RBI is buying the government bonds from the exchequer to allow the exchequer to continue doling out the schemes that we are discussing, food or GRAMG or whatever you want to call it, right? Um, because the RBI is printing money, the supply of rupees is going up, the currency is getting hammered.
Mm.
So one way to think about this is if you want the
We
populism to
read.
continue.
I'll just butt in because I'm not an expert of this sector. We keep on reading. There is far greater amount of money in circulation today than what were there at the point of demonetization.
Yeah, so that's currency. That's currency in circulation. So that's part of it. This is an
Yeah.
even bigger amount. This is orders of magnitude bigger than currency. This is orders.
Okay.
This is so the part you mentioned is called M0. That's physical currency notes in circulation.
Physical notes.
Your-
Yeah.
Yeah, which as you rightly mentioned is a bigger part of GDP today than it was in 2016. But these are what I'm referring to a broader aggregates of money, right?
Okay.
It includes bank deposits, credit cards, etc. But the simple point I was making is because the banking system cannot finance the needs of the government, state plus center plus PSUs, the RBI steps in, prints money, but as it does so, it increases the supply of rupees, which in turn hammers the exchange rate.
Mm.
So if our country wants, if the people who run our country want to be as generous as they are today, then they have to make peace with the fact that the currency will fall even more, right?
Okay.
So because there's only so much to go around. So that's the third piece, right? So you asked me how does the system readjust? I'm not so sure government itself can do a great deal to to intervene in the Sagar Manthan. The more they understand that the Sagar Manthan is a necessary rebalancing of the Indian economy, they let land prices go down, they ease land regulations, they increase FSI. The FSI is a state government subject. The quicker the state governments increase FSI, bring down the price of commercial property, industrial property. The more the government restrains borrowing, squeezes less money out of the bond market, the better. And if that happens, then the cost of capital will drop. If the government restrains its borrowing, the cost of capital will drop because today, as things currently stand, say a reasonably responsible state like Andhra is
Mm.
borrowing in the Bombay SDL market, as SDL stands for State Development Loan. Andhra is borrowing in the SDL market at 8.2%, right? So if this
Okay.
if a quasi sovereign is borrowing at that rate, then a small business can't get access to working capital for less than 12-13%. Right?
Right.
The corresponding rate in Vietnam is 3%. In China, it's 3%. In the United States, it's 3%. Right? So we will have to become globally competitive, given that we're no longer in a position to sell the
So
services
unless
of
we do
our
that,
country.
we will not be able to kickstart our manufacturing, as you were
That's it.
saying that.
If we can't kickstart the manufacturing, we can't be having these lovely calls using imported software. We're using imported software for this. We're using
Mm.
imported hardware for this. And last I knew, there is no domestic software or hardware that we could actually use for this
That's
sort of discussion.
that's right.
So we'll have to make a call. If we want to carry on living the lives we are living, then the cost of land, the cost of capital, and the currency will have to come down for us to be able to build a new India.
And cost of land, not just industrial land, but also the residential land
They're
has to
linked.
come down.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
linked. They're linked. So the factor is in economics, we call it.
Purely as a citizen, when one sees newspapers and see advertisements of new residential products and the kind of quotations, prices which they quote, it simply is out of the pocket of an average middle class, even upper middle class, completely
But to
out
be
of
fair, Nilanjan, to be fair on that,
yeah,
I think if I was a developer, I would also do I would also do what you're suggesting.
right.
I will advertise expensive, and it's up to
And
the
then
buyer.
bring and
Yeah, no,
then
and it's up to
negotiate.
the buyer. It's up to the people watching this podcast to call the developers bluff and to say,
Yeah,
you don't have anybody buying those properties. I'm not going to pay the rates you're saying. At best, I will pay you a half of what you're asking for. And obviously, the developer will huff and puff and pretend as if there's a whole queue of buyers. And you say, well, if that's the way you have it, there's plenty of other people flogging flats, which they are.
right.
Enormous amounts of excess inventory in Mumbai, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, in Delhi. There's
Even
any
in
number
NCR Delhi.
in an NCR, right? So therefore, it's up to those watching this podcast to let the developer advertise whatever rates he wants to.
I
As a
will buy it
capitalist,
at the price which I can afford.
that's right. As a capitalist, you should always suggest that you've got enormous
Right.
demand. That's the last flat there, Nilanjan. If you don't bid for in the next 5 minutes, that flat might not be here. That's how the capitalists will present it.
That is how
It's
they
for
will
the
do it.
it's for the viewer of your podcast to play hardball.
Right. We now we come to what I was trying to understand, politics. Basically, in the last 10, 12 years, what we have seen, across political parties. I'm not just talking about the party which is controlling, which is ruling from the center, but even in
Yeah,
other political parties. Basically, the formula has been that if you want votes, you have to give people something free. So you have to
yeah,
give them, just money in hand is now the latest strategy which has been there for the last 2 3 years, especially since 2024. Every political party is vying with one another in giving money in the hands of people. We just saw it happening in West Bengal. We just are going to be seeing it very soon in Uttar Pradesh. So we will see it after election. With the kind of economic crisis, the picture that you painted, will this political system also work out, or will there have to be forced to make some
yeah.
changes?
So, by the way, as in the context, in the model of the Indian economy I gave you, we can't blame any politician for promising handouts because there's nothing else he can do other
Yes.
than other than giving handouts and catering to some form of interest group, right? Left, right, whatever it is. There's nothing else for the politician to do because, as I discussed, in the context of the global free market economy, there's nothing that matters that the politician actually can move the needle. There's nothing constructive. There's nothing constructive on which, whether it's the politician in Sweden or UK or Japan or India, there's nothing constructive on which the politician can move the needle, and therefore the only thing he can do is promise benefits, welfare, some protectionism, some jingoism. That's the main recipe. In different sort of, you can mix it and match it in different. You can put different permutation combination on a combination of welfare benefits, protectionism, and jingoism. But by and large,
Right.
some mixture of the three is the only thing that the modern politician can serve to the vote bank. Um, and therefore you expect them to carry on doing that until they realize that even the welfare piece is unviable due to the forces of global capitalism wrecking the tax structures and the revenue base that a government has in hand. And hence, we as investors, right? I as an investor, we as people who are thinking through what the future bodes, are preparing for a world where basically the nation state, the Prussian nation state model breaks in front of us. And the question to ask is, what after the nation state? Remember, the nation state had two specific monopolies. The first thing was the nation state was the had a monopoly on taxation. They would collect taxes, use that to
Right.
provide public goods. As I'm describing to you, you can't really. It's very difficult now to
You
tax
can't. You
companies.
can't tax.
You can't tax capital, you can't tax companies, you can't tax talented people because they'll say, I'm out of here, right? So that piece breaks, and therefore the welfare state that Beveridge and Keynes intellectualized and Beveridge implemented after the Second World War, that breaks in front of us. And the
Right.
second was the state had monopoly on coercive power, right? That's the other element of the nation state. The nation state has monopoly on coercive power, and they're supposed to use coercive power to enforce the rule of law. But even that is breaking because on social media, on the internet, right, increasingly it's the virtual world that matters more to people than the real world. On the internet, you could argue Mark Zuckerberg has more coercive power than any sovereign currently in any country, right? So the nation state as it has existed for 160 years is crumbling in front of us. It's crumbling in Europe, it's crumbling in South America, it's crumbling in Africa, it's crumbling in Asia. And what we as investors are trying to think through is what follows after the nation state. And in
Mm.
Breakpoint, what I'm saying is that what follows after the nation state is a group of global gig workers, a group of global gig workers who are telling the whole world that I might be based in Coorg, I might be based in Coimbatore, I might be based in Kanpur, but I'm offering my services on a global basis. So a restaurant chain in Tanzania, which wants to build
Mm.
a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, is tendering. Right, there are plenty of
Mm.
platforms which are available where they tender. They say, "I'm a restaurant chain in Tanzania. I can afford to pay $10,000 for a CRM system. Who can build it for me?" And a fellow
Mm.
sitting in Kanpur can say, "I can build it for you. I'm the cheapest source of CRM." And using AI and his technology training, a guy sitting in Kanpur can build the CRM for the firm in Tanzania and get paid in cryptocurrency, which the Indian taxman will never be
Okay,
able to.
but here again, it means that for that people have to be trained. They have to have sufficient technological awareness. They have to go through a certain education process
Right? So
to
that
be able
that
to
piece,
have that skill.
so that piece, that piece again, the provision of that education will increasingly not be through the university system, because the university system is increasingly turning out to be insufficient, incompetent in rendering and providing this training.
So,
And again, the global gig economy will provide the training. So increasingly, what we are seeing, Nilanjan, and I've highlighted it in the book, we're seeing three very distinctive things. We're seeing that the unemployment rate of educated graduates is
it's going to
orders,
increase.
not only is it increasing, it's orders of magnitude. Unemployed graduates, the unemployment rate of graduates is 10 times higher than that of illiterates. Secondly, the
Then that of illiterate.
illiterates in India have a 3% unemployment rate. Graduates in India have a 40% unemployment rate, right?
Mm.
Secondly, the compensation that graduates receive is much lower than compensation that class 12 pass outs receive, which means that university education,
In
both low,
relative terms.
no, absolute terms, right?
Okay.
So in Mumbai, the city I'm sitting in, a construction worker in Mumbai
No.
earns 2 to 3 times more than a university graduate fresh out of college. Even a university graduate with 10 years experience in Mumbai earns less than a construction worker in Mumbai, right? So university education lowers your chances of employment, dramatically lowers your chances of employment. It lowers your compensation. And thirdly, university education gives you a knowledge set which largely has very little value in the global economy of internet, e-commerce, AI. Indian employers are simply not interested in that skill set. How do we know? Because we can see that out of every 100 graduates coming out of our colleges, Nilanjan, in the year of graduation, barely four of them get a job. Right? The other 96, nobody has any use for, because the education system is saying what you've learned in university is close to useless. And therefore, the mode of education increasingly will have nothing to do with formal university education. It'll be about using your mobile phone, using the internet to get
Self
practical.
education, is that going to be
Yeah.
the way to
Uh,
success in coming
I would
times?
say vocational self-education, right? So some people might train themselves on how to produce a podcast such as this. Others will train themselves on how to advise middle class people on their
So
on their
we in
on their
India have
savings.
always had this guru shishya, tradition. You had, a young person not educated going to a, skilled worker and learning the skills and then becoming the guru. You know, various trades. Be it iron work or leather work. Everywhere you're talking about export of footwear. So the footwear industry is something where people have always learnt on the job. They started out as basically helpers and then gradually in the pre-automation state. But now, of course, with automation, I do not know how things are really going to roll out.
So we will have that, but on a virtual basis. The guru might be sitting in Ghaziabad, the shishya might be sitting in Germany, or vice
somewhere
versa,
else, and
right?
yeah, and
Vice
on
versa,
phone.
and it'll be all virtual. It'll be all video call, and you'll have guru shishya on a global scale, and you'll have gig work on a global scale. We're already seeing the beginnings of that. So when I'm going to say places like Dehradun, Indore, Coimbatore, Nagpur, I'm seeing this global gig work market where people who hitherto used to work for giant IT companies have now been rendered unemployed. They're moving back to their native hometowns, and from there they are building their small gig work businesses, where they're sitting in Dehradun or Nagpur and doing
and
uh,
and
uh,
doing
uh,
what?
doing tech projects, doing social media management, doing virtual education for people around the world. So that will be how India will be rebuilt, right? This whole notion that you'll go to university, get a degree, get a job, get promoted, get pay rises, that is gone, history, right? The new India will be you'll finish class 12.
So, but all this is also going to lead to a breakdown of the social order as it has existed all these years. Going to a university also means that you are going and becoming part of a huge group of peers. Your classmates, your university mates. Where is Are people going to be interacting with one another? Everybody is going to be trapped their own little gig work. So there
Right.
would
So
be some
yeah,
crisis. So what is
So
it?
I'm not, so
How?
there'll be a period of adjustment, right? There is in Hindi the better phrase. I think the phrase in Hindi is more evocative. Sagar Manthan. I
Ah.
think there
You
there
said,
will be a Sagar
Sankat
Manthan.
Kal. You
Yeah,
use these words, Sankat Kal, that is
Mm.
what is today,
Yeah.
and
So
Sagar Manthan is what is also
yeah,
going to be happening
yeah.
very
So
shortly.
there's a churn. There'll be enormous churn. We'll leave the old behind. We'll move towards the new, and there's plenty of historical precedents for this. So let's take one historical precedent just to illustrate the scale of what lies ahead. So 1880, 1879, right, in New Jersey, Menlo Park, New Jersey, Thomas Edison comes up with electricity, the light bulb, basically comes
That's
up with
right.
the light bulb, right? So he creates General Electric, he creates the light bulb, and it's immediately apparent that the candle maker's job is gone, right? So even
Job is
then,
gone.
right, even all the way back in 1880, it was apparent to the candle maker that my job is gone. Um, and with a few years gap, it was apparent that the people in New York who light the gas light in the evening and switch off the gas light in the morning, their jobs are also gone. And a few years later, when the motor car, 1897 odd, the first prototypes of motor cars started coming out, it was apparent that the horseless, the horse,
The
the
horse,
horse,
horse, horse
the
carts
horse,
are gone.
yeah, the horse will be unemployed, the horse cart will be unemployed, etc. Right? Right. So these are called substitution effects. So these are existing professions rendered redundant by disruption, by technology, right? But by 1910, Nilanjan, by 1910, a happier story emerged. It became evident that you will now have nightlife because there's electricity. You'll have nightlife, you'll have restaurants, you'll have nightclubs, you'll have the gramophone, you'll have singers, you'll have Hollywood, you'll have actors, and so on and so forth. And what's called complementarity effects started emerging, right? But that period, 1890 to 1910, had difficulties for America, disruptions for America, economic crises for America, and it was a painful period, right? And we will, and they went through a degree of churn when they left the old behind and embraced the new. Now, it took them the best part of 30 years to move from substitution to complementarity. Hopefully, this time round, it'll not take us 30 years. Hopefully, in 2 to 3 years, we'll be able to move from the old to the new. But even that 2 to 3 year period will be disruptive, and hence I use the phrase Sankat Kal. In totality, we will go through a Sagar Manthan.
As somebody who has definitely spent much more, time in this earth, what the the scenario that you're painting is quite frightening and absolutely mind-boggling. Really speaking, I wouldn't know how to wade through this. Now, suppose somebody like you, three things. What somebody like you, the stereotype Indian middle class person, just like you, who's not an expert. What are the 3 points you would tell these people that they must do immediately if they want to start getting out of the
Sure,
crisis that they are in? They would be
sure.
having at least half of their life still left in front of them.
Yeah. I also hope I have half of my life ahead of me,
Yes,
although
I definitely would hope. I definitely don't have half of my life left
uh,
in front of me. But
although my son pulls my leg, that how does it feel, Baba, that that you've lived longer on the earth than you live henceforth? And I try not to think like that. Anyway,
but anyway,
three things for
it's three
people
things.
in the yeah. So the first is increase
Three.
your
It could
savings
be
rate.
four also. You can add if you
So
suddenly feel like it.
increase your savings rate. Increase your savings rate. In the years that are coming, plenty of difficulties coming towards us. Save more money. Save more money in your through fixed deposits, banking system, through mutual funds. Invest globally, but
Yes.
whatever you do, however you invest, the investment discussion we can have some other day. But save more money. We are heading into difficult times. Don't get deluded. Don't get deluded, misled by the public commentary. These are difficult times. There's more difficulty to come. To give a lot of credit to the Reserve Bank of India, the Reserve Bank of India is repeatedly highlighting that net household savings rate means savings less borrowings divided by income. Net household savings rates are close to 50-year lows. That is unsustainable. That simply doesn't work. So whoever is watching, my submission is first
Save.
thing to do is think carefully about what you spend money on and save more money than you've done hitherto. The second piece is be skeptical about if anybody tells you that the next 10 years will be like the last 10, 20 years. Be skeptical about that. Get ready for a world where the way we have lived and worked is unlikely to work in the foreseeable future, right? For reasons that I'm discussing, and we're seeing this on a daily basis. If you open the annual reports of large Indian firms, large listed firms, prominent firms, almost all of them, you can see in the annual reports, they're either laying off 5,000 people or 20,000 people or 25,000 people. None of these companies is making a press release. All of them, when I look through the annual reports, these are big companies. I can see they're laying off tens of thousands of people each, right? And
Each
when
year.
therefore, in Breakpoint, when we put the data together in totality, Nilanjan, we can see there is no job creation in the last 3 years. I doubt there'll be job creation, white collar job creation for middle class people in the next 3 years, right?
Next
As
five
AI,
years.
right? So therefore, for us, it's important for us to rethink our lives, and whether it is me, whether it is your relatives, my friends, we will all have to prepare for a world where we'll have to do gig work, we'll have to be entrepreneurial, we'll have to acquire new skills to earn a living, to build a life for ourselves. And the third piece is expect less and less from the state, right? As you were saying a few minutes ago, as my parents said in the 80s, the government should do this and the government should do that. I am seeing that the world over, the government can increasingly do very little, right? The government job is largely now around rhetoric and image management. In practical terms, the sovereign is increasingly powerless, especially on matters to do with the virtual world, internet, e-commerce, technology. Right, the sovereign is increasingly powerless, and the sovereign's financial might is diminishing on a monthly basis as tax revenues the world over become harder and harder to collect. Right, so expect less from the government, uh, expect more
Well, I
from
do
yourself.
remember that the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, way back in 2015, 2016, he started saying that the government will not be able to provide jobs. So that is there. But I do not know if that kind of a statement was taken seriously at that time. And now, with the kind of picture that you have painted, it appears that the government will have to, pull back of the kind of distribution of various things that it has been doing.
Right, and
You have, yeah,
just to put one caveat around it.
yes,
Just as just as when I go to see my barber, right, when I go to see
right,
my barber doesn't start our discussion, our commercial exchange by saying that, Saurabh, you have very little hair. There really is no need for you to come to the barber shop, and therefore, I don't want to waste your time and take your money. The barber doesn't do that for
right.
obvious reasons, because his job is to pretend that I have hair.
That he's doing a great job.
that he's doing a great job, and his job is to pretend that he's done something for me, and my job is to pretend as if I have hair and I pay him, a few hundred rupees for the haircut.
Right.
So it's, and both of us know we are pretending. So
Mm.
similarly, when we face our politicians, we should know they're pretending when they make promises, just
Mm.
as they know they are pretending when they make the promises, right? So we shouldn't take it at face value when they say we'll do this, that, and the other, because as I'm saying, there's no practical way for them to do much in the world that we are living in and the world that we are heading towards. And this is true the
Well,
world over. Increasingly, the politician is a person who, just as my barber has to pretend to do something useful, the politician also has to pretend to do something useful.
you have explained things, very in great detail. And I would say that at one level, it is a scary picture. Definitely also a picture of great challenges ahead. I think what I will now have to do is that I will have to take your set of projections, your analysis to a political scientist and say that with all these changes happening, what kind of changes can happen in the political world? How is it going to change the nature of our governance? How is it going to change the nature of the relationship between political parties and the citizens of India? There is going to be, if there is going to be churn in the economy, there will also be far greater churn in the realm of politics. So you have given me an idea for many more future episodes, and we will come back to you as the Sagar Manthan goes on after hopefully after every few months or maybe a year or so, to be able to see that where we have come from what we have discussed today. Thank you so
And if
much,
you don't
Saurabh.
if you don't mind my saying so, Nilanjan, all of what I've
Please.
said, I have backed up. My colleagues and I have backed it up
No, no,
in
I know that. I have
I
gone through
backed it
this
up with
book and I know
Breakpoint,
that
point by
backed
point,
up with.
and we've given around 30 pages of data and references at the end of the book.
That's
So if
right.
somebody is skeptical of what I'm saying, by all means, read the book, refer to the data sources, and we believe that we have made what is a reasonably watertight and at one level, I think, a reasonably commonsensical argument that the world we grew up in is slipping away from us, and we are heading into a new world, a brave new world. It'll have its challenges, but it'll also bring opportunities for our country. Opportunities that our country never enjoyed hitherto.
Well, well said, and thank you very much, Saurabh
Thank
Mukherjee,
you.
for
Thanks,
joining
Nilanjan.
me on this program.